Thank you for joining us today. I know it's a busy day. It's a Saturday. I'm going to put down all these notes because I know we're going to be having a great conversation, and I've included just about everything I could think of that we might need to talk about. But I do want to first make sure that I really recognize you and thank you for taking time today to be here. This is such an important issue for our community. As someone said earlier, it's not only about Pueblo, this is really about what's going on within the region. And we think this is the right time, especially given the fact that we collectively have been trying to have a conversation with our friends at Black Hills about the impact that this is having on our community. And I think it was almost a slap in the face to our community last week when they filed again another 3.7% rate increase, asking for even more. And I think it's fair that we say enough's enough. We have burdened this for quite some time, and we need to have a conversation. So just what I want to do today, so you kind of have an outline of what's going to happen, is I want to spend just a bit of time talking about the piece of legislation and what it hopes to accomplish, and really the aspects of the legal aspects of the provisions within the bill that's being presented, which will be heard in the State Veterans Affairs Committee this coming Monday. That bill has several sponsors who are on that committee, including Representative Mike Foote and Representative Joe Salazar. So we already have support on that committee regarding this topic. The other part of this that I really want to make sure we have plenty of time for is I want to hear from you. And I hope, and I know that this is a passionate issue, I know that there's going to be a lot of frustration, not directed at me, but essentially directed at Black Hills. But I hope that you'll be short, concise, and give a real thorough, but yet brief assessment of how this is impacting you. And you can see the crowd, and I want to make sure that we have time to hear from everyone, because one of the things I'm going to be here today doing is taking notes. Because I know not all of you can join us on Monday, and I know that the committee has, given the time, has put a constraint on how many can testify. But I want to make sure that your voice is really heard and that I make sure I understand the challenges that Black Hills has imposed on you. So first, if I could just talk about the bill. The bill seeks to add extra provisions to the Office of Consumer Counsel. Right now, the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, is expected to kind of be our voice, our advocate when rate increases happen or different types of changes, meaning if they need to buy additional assets or if they move or anything that might impact us or ultimately impact the consumer. And mostly, we are always concerned about rate increases. Well, how is that going to impact our financial status, our bottom dollar here? I don't know, and I think you would probably agree with me that we could say that the Public Utilities Commission has been our friend and our advocate as a consumer counsel in this. And this goes back to the history several times over and over where Black Hills has made requests to increase the rates that our citizens are paying. And throughout those times, many times Black Hills' request is this. So for example, in December of 2013, when they requested a 90 megawatt power plant, they asked for a 90 megawatt power plant to the PUC. And the PUC declined, saying, no, you only need a 40 megawatt. And so part of that has been the PUC saying, no, you don't need as much as you need, Black Hills. But at the same time, I think to a greater extent, we don't know that we have received the fair end out of that. And many times, most agree, and this is a big conversation happening at the Capitol about whether or not the PUC is really advocating on behalf of consumers. And so, the Office of Consumer Counsel, what this bill would do is take into consideration other factors. Anytime there's a rate change, the Office of Consumer Counsel could be an advocate for us. And the Office of Consumer Counsel was established for that. It was funny, I was talking with a gentleman this morning who was around during the time when they wrote the legislation for the Office of Consumer Counsel. But over the years, it's kind of lost its authority because the PUC has become so big and so authoritative. And so we want to say, look, the effort here is to make sure that we have someone on our behalf making sure that when these rate increases are being proposed, that they're legitimate. I think it's upsetting that we have the highest energy rates in the Front Range. And we are different in comparison to other communities. We know that in regards to our employment rate, our child poverty rate, and different other factors that impact our community differently. And I think those are fair things to ask of the Office of Consumer Counsel and the PUC to take into consideration whenever Black Hills says that they can just increase our rates overnight. So this is what the intent of the legislation does. I will tell you that Black Hills has been very busy these last couple days, working hard to confuse people about what this bill does. So much so that recently the cab industry, taxi cabs, which are regulated by the PUC and its utility, they've said, Representative Garcia, are you coming after us too? No, we're not going after the cabs. This is a different conversation specifically about utilities. And specifically for us, about the utilities that we face with Black Hills being an investor-owned utility. So, with that, can I answer any quick questions about the legislation itself? And then I would like to, within the next 5 minutes, get to a point where I can hear from you and hear how this has impacted, one, your home, your business, or any other aspect. Just to put it in context, this 3.7% increase is already, as you know, I'm preaching to the choir, right? Already in addition to multiple rate increases that they have requested from us and received with the benefit of the PUC. But this 3.7% increase will impact a home on average by about $60 to $70 annually. Businesses by about $210 to $220. And we have crunched some numbers. I'm going to share some of them with you. I'm going to save some of them in case we have someone here from Black Hills who's going to be knowing what we're going to talk about tomorrow. But CSU Pueblo, our institution, our university, Colorado State University of Pueblo, their electric bill alone by this 3.7% increase will be an additional $70,000 a year. And so we know that there are other institutions that we're taking into consideration. This really impacts a community. And so I understand that, but I want to make sure I clearly understand how it impacts you, how it impacts your adjustment, because I think one of the unfair things that Black Hills has been unable to do is it's hard to estimate what your electric bill is going to be next month. And there's a lot of things that we can plan for. We could say, well, if I'm going to take a trip from here to Denver and take my vehicle, how much is gas per gallon? You know, how many times will I go back and forth? We can plan some of this. But I know, with the winter months behind us, I was amazed to see that Black Hills' first quarter reporting for their profit shareholders in 2014, first quarter, were even above the bar that they set. And one of the statements from the CEO was, this was due to a cold winter. Well, what are we going to say this summer? It's going to be a hot summer, and I think we need to take this into consideration. I want to have a good, clear message to say from you all to Black Hills this coming Monday. So I don't want to take any more time talking. I want to hear from you. Any quick questions I can answer about the legislation? Yes, sir?
Yes, I'd like to know...
Give me 1 second. We're going to get the mic for you so that we can make sure everyone hears.
My name is Jerry Grady, and I represent the Coalition for the Homeless Southern Colorado Homeless. And I've been to the remote meetings and so forth. And one of the main concerns that I have, not only about only 25% are actually paying for the rates of electricity, the other 75% with all these other fees and funds and so forth. And does it address that? And how does it address the fact about the solar power? They have made it where people who have solar power, they're putting in 110%, they're putting 10% back in. They charge you so much, like 10 cents a milliamp, and then they'll only pay you 1% of 1%. Back on the solar power, does it address that on the solar power and other alternative energy sources? Does it address that problem? Mainly, how is it that a public utility that is private, privately owned by the citizens has the right to charge it out of control? And like we say, the utility boards are giving them a free hand to do about anything. And I know one lady that they actually own their own home, because they couldn't pay their electricity, the lights cut off, they were evicted out of the house, and if you're called back on your property, it's $1,000 fine, and, you know, they're confiscating people's property. That, you know, where in the Constitution is allowed for a public utility to take somebody's home. You know, addressing things like this is what concerns me. Black Hill has been the main cause for homelessness in Pueblo City and County. And can we, does the legislation address that? I read part of the legislation on my email, but I was wanting to be more specific.
Sure.
Okay, could you address some of those?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for that question. Let me read several things here that the bill talks about. It's several pages. And it does touch on a lot of what you're talking about. One, the disparities between a utilities rate increase and the quantity or quality of that provided. I think there are some of us who could draw a logical argument that if we lived, if our community were in the Grand Canyon, it would cost a lot more to be able to provide energy there because of the geographical boundary and some of the hurdles that a community would face. As we compare ourselves along the Front Range, this just doesn't make sense. There's no reason why our rates should be as high as they are. That's a fair point. The other thing is, it does talk about the utilities policies concerning shutoffs and reinstatement services to those customers who fall behind. Those are some of the issues as well. Now, I do want to be clear that this is not a public-owned utility. This is an investor-owned utility. And there is a difference. If you look at our model compared to Colorado Springs has a municipal, that's a public utility that's municipalized. And sometime in the 80s, the city of Pueblo talked about it. I was looking through some documents and reading. Councilman Mike Oshiato at that time had proposed to the citizens of Pueblo at along different times in Pueblo's history about whether or not the city of Pueblo should consider municipalizing and taking that on like they do in Colorado Springs. The citizens here in Pueblo have decided that wasn't the approach they wanted then. That's not to say we couldn't change course now, but at that point in history, the citizens had decided that wasn't the approach they wanted to have. And so this bill does talk and speak to a lot of the specific issues we are facing here regarding shutoffs, regarding those types of fees that you're talking about. There are a number of fees that we just don't understand, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know that I completely understand, because when I ask them for these answers, give them pointed questions just like that, the general response I get is, we'll get back with you. Well, guess what? They don't get back with me just like they don't get back with you. And this utility is so enshrined in, I don't want to say secrecy, but it's not transparent, that's for sure. So it makes it very difficult for someone to just open up and read and really have the answers right there. One more quick follow-up, and I'm going to take his question, sir.
Okay, just one question I would ask. I remember back in the 20s and the 30s, and even before then, in 1890, when U.S. Steel and quite a few, and then later on AT&T, had to be broken apart because they had a monopoly. And they're using public money. Doesn't that violate the antitrust laws? That I know if I wanted to start a business, say I was going to clean a parking lot, I can't get a loan from the city to start a private business, and private businesses can't be financed by public funds. So how the hell is Black Hills doing it? Yeah.
So there's a question in that in this monopoly. This is some of the challenges we face, and I will say that's one of the things that we want to recognize as a community. In the end, when we pay for these rates, when we pay for the turbines, when we have them out here, we don't own them. Our community does not own those turbines. So this is what happens when you have an investor-owned utility. And so again, we could have a bigger, broader conversation about whether or not that's a good fit for our community. This legislation specifically doesn't answer that, because our community has decided that's the track we want to be on historically, not to say we couldn't change it now, but this is why the Office of Consumer Counsel will be able to better advocate for us, because it takes into considerations that it doesn't matter if you're a public utility or an investor-owned utility. If your rates are going up, our citizens have a right to be able to say, we're going to weigh in and see if that's a fair assessment of whether or not that rate should be at that amount. Yes, sir.
Representative Garcia, thank you for being a catalyst for finally speaking out against this, because certainly haven't had too much coming from here. But your legislation, from what I've gathered from it, I've come here to learn more about it, to get more of the specifics. It seems to be a rewrite of the mission statement that the PUC should have in protecting the consumers. And it is becoming increasingly apparent that they're merely a rubber stamp for the utility monopolies. So again, you know, I think you're a pilgrim in an unholy land, even here in Pueblo, because Pueblo City Council and PEDCO are so intertwined. And I'm glad they finally showed up to, you know, be the audience to this upswelling of complaints that people are having. You said 21%, it's more like 36%. The average rate, if this increase is approved, which I believe it will be, on top of the 5% that has already been approved for that turbine that our city attorney proved with Black Hill's own documents that it was really unnecessary and unjustified. The average rate for the residents here in Pueblo is going to be $108 a month. In Denver, Aurora, Fort Collins, it's going to be about $69.25 a month. Okay? A city council, you know, I mean, this is starting to show this negative multiplier effect on our economy. Because now, you know, I think Black Hills made this announcement last week because, hey, kill the beast while it's wounded. We have city council fighting with PEDCO over this half-cent sales tax for economic development. You know, they're going to try to get $20 million to pay for, among other things, over $4 million worth of LED lights for our streets, to pay for those, to pay to install them, and then surrender actual ownership of them to Black Hills Energy. Okay, so this city has been bankrolling their assets for quite some time now.
So great question, sir. Let me answer several of those, and if I don't answer all of them, let's follow back up. But again, I want to hear from everyone. So let's talk about this. Let me give you a little bit of history according to the perspective that we understand on how Black Hills came to our community. You all probably remember Aquila was our provider before that. And one of the challenges is when Aquila is sold, there's some discussion about whether or not when Black Hills purchased Aquila, whether or not that was a fair price for it. And I think the assessment that I could give you is when Black Hills essentially purchased Aquila and came to Pueblo, they went to the PUC and essentially said, we bought a lemon. We bought a lemon, meaning the infrastructure and other things that we were going to invest in and purchase, you know, it's not as up to standard as we would like. So of course, they went to the PUC, they asked for improvements, they asked for those rate increases. So you're right, I'm giving a lower number, but not taking into consideration all the history, more recently. So, as a result of that, you remember there was, at some point, I think it was in 2010, that Xcel stopped providing energy to Black Hills, which then prompted that you had to build, because Pueblo didn't have a plan if Xcel wasn't providing there, right? And by geographical location, by the monopoly, and by the purchasing rights, Black Hills owned the infrastructure here in Pueblo. Again, going back to the 80s, the city council at that time could have had a conversation about whether or not they believed it was right to municipalize. And the city of Colorado Springs had that conversation, and they decided it was worth their community investing in the utility and purchasing. We didn't. And so as a result, Black Hills then petitioned to the PUC, built the turbine. But what has resulted as a result of that, and you read as a result, the 3.7% is a result of these wind farms that they say they need to be compensated for. And this is what happens with an investor-owned utility. I have to keep coming back to that because it is so important that you understand that this is the model we operate under. If tomorrow the city council decided that they didn't want to have that process and we were going to work to municipalize, then that could be a fair conversation about everything else. But that's not the model right now. So it's really, really important that we all understand this is an investor-owned model. And so, yeah, their investors want to make sure they get their return. on investment. And I think that's the point of having this legislation. Now, I would say that I agree with you that the PUC has become a rubber stamp. But we have to remember that we are taking on multiple parts of a layered system. And I think the most logical way for us to have an immediate voice, there's a number of things the city could do, the county could do, the legislature could do, we could file lawsuits, we could do different things. But the most immediate, fastest way to have relief is for a piece of legislation to direct the Office of Consumer Counsel to consider these different things which have never been considered. So, for example, one of the things that this bill requires is that the Office of Consumer Counsel will have to take testimony from 3 parts of the state throughout the year, 3 different parts, and public testimony. That's one of the things they don't do right now. Go to the regions that are being impacted by this, take public testimony, because you shouldn't just be sitting up in Denver and getting emails. You should have to come to events like this and hear from real people and hear how it impacts them. And furthermore, then make those recommendations. And that's what the bill says, is that based on those conversations, they will report back to the General Assembly by January 15th. I didn't want to say, let's study this for 5 years. That doesn't say this in this bill. That doesn't say, let's give them 10 years to give us a study, because we know what happens there. You will report back to us by January 2015 when the General Assembly convenes, and you will say, what are the recommendations on how things need to change? Yes, ma'am.
I just have a comment to make. My name is Mary Hobbs, and I work really hard to get homeless veterans off the street. And the one contributing factor that is against my work is utilities, electric company. So if my veteran gets behind their electricity, and there is no money out there to get them back in place, they're going to lose their housing. So I think it's great that you're in the Veterans Committee, because this does directly impact veterans. And the other thing I want to make a comment about, and I've heard this before, is Petco corporate welfare. Maybe that's something we all think about.
Thank you. So if you don't mind, I appreciate that. And one of the things I'm going to start doing, since we're transitioning, is I want to leave enough time for me to hear and write your concerns and how this is impacting you. In addition, around 3:05, want to say let's conclude, but I'm going to be around. I'm going to give you my business card. If there's anyone here who feels like, you know, I really want to tell you something, but I don't want to say it publicly in front of someone, I don't want them to know, you feel free to, you have my email address, you have my phone number there, to write it down, to share it so that I can have it part of the testimony, or not part of the testimony, just from my own perspective. And I will be around to visit personally with you by the time we conclude. So I want to hear from you regarding how Black Hills has impacted you specifically. Jerry's going to be walking around with a mic, just keep your hand up. And if you can be brief, because I want to hear, my goal is to hear from every single one of you today. Yes, ma'am.
Velma Campbell. I just had one last question, if I might, about the legislation, which is to help me understand the relationship between the Office of Consumer Counsel and the PUC a little better. While it would obviously be great to have a public advocate who's funded and who has a mission to perform that function, what is the relationship with the authority of the PUC? Would they be required, what requirement would there be in the legislation for them to take more consideration of the findings of the Office of Consumer Counsel, or would they just be able to ignore a better advocate?
Great, thank you so much for that question. So back in 1968, this is the Colorado Revised Statutes. The legislature put in an Office of Consumer Counsel. I think it would be fair to say at that time, things were a little different, right? And there's been a few tweaks to the Office of Consumer Counsel throughout the years, but the Office of Consumer Counsel really doesn't represent what we would like it to look like today. And I have heard that over and over from people. This is not the first community meeting I've had on this. And the common theme is that we need to have a bigger voice. Well, the PUC is not going to be that bigger voice, because let me tell you, by statute, by statute, the way the PUC is organized, you need to be an industry expert. And so it's very hard for us to say, let's put on some citizens just on the PUC. It doesn't really work that way. And I guess we could try those things, but I'm a practical person. I spent 6 years in the Marine Corps, was deployed to Iraq in 2003. You know, one thing Marines are known for doing is getting the job done. And so as I look at this and I say, yeah, there's a number of different ways we could try to do something, but in the end, what is the most practical? What is the way that's going to have the biggest impact on what we're trying to do? And so the Office of Consumer Counsel, even though it was created in 1968, really has lacked the real authority, I would say, to be able to counterweight the PUC. And again, I don't think the PUC operated the way it does today, like it was in 1968. And so this right here is probably the first logical aspect. And again, I want to remind you that I've talked to experts on our side. Representative Max Tyler, who's the chairman of the Energy and Transportation Committee, who's also a co-sponsor on this bill, really an advocate for consumers, recommended that this would be the first most practical approach. This is a collaborative approach. In the bill, you might notice that Representative Crisanta Duran, the chairwoman of the Joint Budget Committee, is also on the bill. This is what indicates a probably most logical approach for how we can get almost immediate results. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm going to be very brief. I spent nearly $500,000 putting solar panels on my buildings, and I supposedly I'm producing about 60% of what I need. The issue is, the problem is, I don't know, out of nowhere, the building was closed for a few months, no electricity was being used, and I was being billed thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars for electricity. And apparently they have this multiplier where they take a rate when the electricity is being used at a high rate, and then they stick you with that. Demand rate, okay. Anyway, the thing is that I'm really very angry right now about this whole process, because they screw not only business but people in general. I like what our representative is saying, you know, but the issue is, part of the problem that we have with that sausage factory up in Denver is that we put in information and then it's going to get ground out and we're not going to get what we want in the end. And that's going to happen this year, it'll happen next year. 5 years from now, we'll still be discussing how we could rein them in. I think that what we need to do is get together, come up with some legislation, not use a BB gun with these bastards, but use a shotgun. And if we have to do initiative, a referendum to get the city council to change, if we need to go after the state, I tell you, back in 1970, I was considered a militant and I was part of a third political party, and we got enough signatures to place me on the ballot for the first time in the history of Colorado. And I'm telling you that there's people power. And what we ought to do is we ought to discuss how we could change the system at the state level and at the local level. And by taking total control, not halfway, not saying, hey, we're going to ease up here, a little here. Let's go for the jugular and let's do something. But we're going to have to get together and plan that. Thank you.
My name's Frank Peralta. I'm a retired electrical contractor. I worked on every power plant in southern Colorado, so I know a lot about these plants. I did some research on what other communities are doing throughout the United States. 4 key issues that they came up with to do what kind of like El Relay is saying here are these 4, this is 4 short sentences. What they come up with is a change in the law from PUC commissioners being appointed by the governor to commissioners being elected to office by Colorado voters, number 1. Number 2, a change in the law from PUC commissioners approving all utility fees and rates to commissioners review and recommend approval to or disapproval to the ratepayers. So the ratepayers would make the decision. Number 3, a change in the law for approval of a severance tax of 50% on sales to out-of-state entities of natural gas production, electric power production, and water production. And the reason for that is when the utility gets pissed, they will sell out of state and create an artificial shortage to punish you, okay? Fourth, changing the law for approval of an income tax of 50% on profit margins above 2.9% for natural gas utilities, producers, electric power utilities, and producers, and water and sewer utilities. These are some of the things that other communities have done to keep them in check. Just like Al Belay says, if you don't go for the jugular, they'll just keep on beating you down. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Those are some great recommendations. And I will tell you that's something that we've thought a little bit about for subsequent things that we could pursue at a different level. Meaning the governor does appoint those members on the PUC. And so that commission model is something, as you indicated, and I appreciate you doing your research on this, has been something that other states have tried. I mean, I think this is great. This is a first step in a series of steps about making sure that it's not one or two of us. This is all of us advocating for significant change and how that should happen. So thank you so much, sir, for that perspective.
I'm Cheryl Moore, and we started this process about, I don't know, a year and a half ago, Leroy, and you asked specific stories. Well, what we did, Sister Nancy and Ann got stories. So I have 4 specific examples, and it might be really good to have a little history here, to take 4 stories, because I'm sure that some of the same problems are happening now. Anyway, we made big postcards of these stories, about like this, and we were going to send those postcards.
Not on the mic.
We were going to send those postcards to the PUC. But you know what? Maybe you would like our postcards of those concrete stories. I'll bring them to you, and then you'll have those as a little background for a year ago.
And Jerry's going to be getting that mic to you. Again, I want to give everyone equal opportunity. Sir, thank you.
Hello, how you doing? Yeah, summertime is coming, and he's going to be going up, and some of the residents here, mostly the elderly, the poor, and the handicapped, are the ones that can't wait for us to go for their jugular, because it's going to be their jugular this hot summer when they're trying to toss how they're going to pay for the groceries, how they're going to pay for the electricity, how they're going to pay for the gas. And it's going to cost a lot of jugglers this summer before we get together and go for theirs. But we have met plenty of times, and with the city council, my first time with you, and with the, I think that the cost is too high to keep waiting and to keep having these meetings, because one elderly, one handicapped, one poor person that dies is the failure of our government, because we depend on you, and that's why we elect you to represent us and to fight our battles for us. And our battles are being lost. Every day that one dies, we read in the paper that one died of 105 because electricity was off, or one didn't eat because they had to try to pay for the electricity bill, therefore they didn't eat, or they didn't take the medication the way they should have. I don't know what you can do immediately, if you can do anything. I don't know what kind of power you have. I know it takes the power of all of you to do something. But something got to be advised for those who can't afford to make it through the summer without some kind of stipulation to help them pay for these humongous bills they're getting, and especially if it keeps going up. And I see Black Hills keep going to city council, and every time they go for something, we never put some kind of stumbling block in their way. We give them what they want. We give them get them a bigger and bigger monopoly. And I think most of it's because of the failure of our representatives. We got to get people in there with some power, some people that think for the people, not for the corporations. And I don't know why. I just think this is going to be a hot summer. It's already been hot. I'm thinking how I'm going to pay my bill and what I'm going to do, and what I'm going to have to cut when I start getting those $150 electric bills. And some of these people are cut on a budget of $700. It's going to be tough. We're going to depend on you and these other councilmen here to kick your boots up and take care of these ones that ain't going to be able to take care of themselves. I don't know what you're going to do, but we'll see what happens.
Thank you, sir, for that comment. I do believe that our community should have one of the strongest voices, and so one of the things that we as a community have to do is be willing to have these tough conversations. And you know, we understand the challenges that our community faces. I think that's why I've been happy this year and last year in the General Assembly to work on a number. It's just not, well, our community just doesn't need to focus on one or two issues. We need to focus on a number of different issues to make sure that we have a better generation and better legacy for my kids, your kids, or grandkids. And so I appreciate what you're saying, sir. I thank you so much for your comments. Sir, I'm going to hear from you, Mr. Ortiz.
Hi, my name is Gilbert Ortiz. They call me Bo. I own a small business on the east side, Chicken and Pasta, Ortiz Catering. You know, we have one full-time employee. We're a small business, locally owned. We buy all our stuff locally. But you know, there's only so much we can continue to raise the costs of our food and be, you know, affordable to the families that we serve in our neighborhood. And you know, now that these rate hikes are going through the roof, you know, we have to make decisions as a business. Do we improve, do we put in a new air conditioner for our employees? Do we fix the deck out in front of our building? Do we put new asphalt? Do we do, you know, cosmetic things around our business to make it look better? Because we want the east side to look better and we want to promote the east side. But unfortunately, Black Hills is sucking that investment money right out of our checking account. And, you know, as a city councilman in 2002, me, along with Mike Oshiato, we tried to start the public utility and take over that utility. And we were hit with a lot of interference. A lot of people get that money from these utilities for their nonprofits, for other things like that. And so the utilities have a lot of friends, and we were being lobbied very heavily to kill the bill. Unfortunately, you know, me and Mike Oshiato were serious about getting that done and owning our own utility. But, you know, the other people on council, we just couldn't get 4 votes to get it started. So, you know, what I envision is when you see Colorado Springs Utility and they want to do a rate hike, you know, it could cost the city councilman their job if they're going to give it too high of a rate hike. What power do we have on Black Hills? None. You know, if there's a politician in Denver that wants to raise fees or raise taxes, taxes go to the vote of the voters, right? The Tabor bill. Fees, I mean, we can replace politicians every 2 years or every 4 years if we don't like a fee that they put in place. What can we do with Black Hills? Absolutely nothing. So, you know, I thank you for your efforts and everything that you're doing in